This morning, we'll call on Dr. Linda Akoto to give us the opening prayer.
Please, shall we bow down our heads in prayer? Our Lord and Father Jesus, we thank you for yet another day. We thank you for bringing us all here from our various places to this gathering to discuss the labor statistics of the annual income, household, and expenditure survey. We thank you. We ask that, Father, Lord Jesus, let our discussions and deliberations achieve all its intended purpose of informing policy. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for an answered prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Akoto. I would like to acknowledge the presence of a few of our development partners and MDs here with us this morning. In our midst with us, we have reps from NDPC, Ghana National Association of Teachers, in the person of Mr. Thomas Musa. Sir, please, you're welcome. And then Mr. Isaac Ba. Sir, please, you're welcome. We also have reps from SHRAJ, from the Ministry of Local Government, Decentralization and Rural Development. We also have reps from the Gender Ministry and also local government. Then also from the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations. For our DPs, we have reps from the Danish Embassy. You're welcome, ILO, and then ONS. We acknowledge the rest as and when they come in. To officially welcome all of us to this morning's program, we'll call on Mr. Bright Mensah, the coordinator of AHES, to welcome us.
Professor Kobnenim, the Deputy Government Statistician, Dr. Frimpong Engwa, our Professor Bulletin, Director of Economic Statistics at the GSS, other directors of Ghana Statistical Service, our development partners, representatives of the various MMDAs, our friends, as we all say from the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this special event. Statistical Service, as you all are aware, and as we have been doing, we are mandated to provide, collect, analyze, and release official statistics to all of us. So this morning we are gathered to officially release the Ghana 2023 Annual Household Income and Expenditure Survey, Q3 Labor Statistics Bulletin. Now, the AHES is the first nationally representative panel survey that was started in 1st January 2022. Now, it is designed to provide disaggregated labor statistics to inform planning and other decisions. So, what we are going to release this morning, I would say it has come out of months of hard work and determination from the team. And we are happy to share the insights with you. I hope you find the information very insightful and valuable, and I look forward to receiving your questions and hopefully providing useful answers and satisfying answers to you. I welcome you once again to this program. Thank you.
We now call on the government statistician, Prof. Samuel Kobnenim, to give us the presentation on the AHES Labor Statistics Bulletin. Prof.
Thank you very much, Francisca. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thought the clap delayed, so when the response was also delaying, I was not too sure what was going to happen today. Thank you for the second round massive response. Today, as the coordinator indicated, we are here to officially release the third quarter 2023 labor statistics bulletin. Before we get into the release, I am aware that quite a number of us have associated the service with traditional economic statistics, i.e. GDP, gross domestic product, consumer inflation, and producer inflation. However, these associations do not fully represent the mandate of the service. The mandate of the service is to advise government and the general public on all matters related to statistics. That is why in the last couple of years, we are expanding the scope of statistics that we release beyond the traditional economic statistics that are indicated earlier on. One of which is the trade statistics that in the past year we've been releasing and we've institutionalized. The second is the labor statistics that we started this year, last year, and this year. We're going to share with you releases from the first 3 quarters of 2023. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is to provide a background. If we look on the high table, you see 2 persons representing academia and policy represented there. So the background I'm going to share with you is to give you a sense that it is not the object of statistical service just to put out a number for the sake of it, but more importantly, look at the number in the context of how government utilizes numbers and how it informs livelihood transformation. So the background will provide us with the needed context so that every number that we leave here with will be related to what the Ministry of Employment, Labor Relations is thinking about. That is why we want them to give a response after we've done the release. One of the heavy users of our data set is the academic community, and that is why we have Professor Bulletin joining us. We wouldn't want these numbers to be used out of context, so I'm going to spend a couple of minutes to walk you through some key concepts so that we have the metadata that surrounds the number that we're putting out there. Obviously, it's important to talk about the methodology as well. In terms of the findings, we've put them into 3 broad categories. What we all know as labor force characteristics that we always talk about, but for the first time, because we have institutionalized labor statistics, consistent with what we do with GDP, we're going to share with you how labor statistics have changed either on year-on-year basis and on quarter-on-quarter basis. And I'm going to give the definitions for which we do that. The third domain of the presentation, which for me is very critical, is what we term as either labor mobilities or labor transitions. Every time we hear that jobs are being created, we really need to ask ourselves, are the same old people that are changing jobs, or are people that were not employed that are getting new jobs? So any country that uses one-off data set to try and track labor statistics will not be able to see how labor is moving across different areas, i.e. from formal to informal, across different economic activity status, from employment to unemployment to outside the labor force, and different characterizations of labor statistics. And finally, we'll put away some key takeaways to guide the conversation beyond what happens in this room. In this presentation, let's focus our minds on 4 things. I know the media colleagues would want to run away with what is our unemployment status now. But we want to mute that conversation a little bit. Let's mute the conversation on the levels. Because we are in the space of collecting data over time, let's focus the conversation more on what has happened over time. So although we are doing statistics for the first 3 quarters of 2023, we're going to give you data spanning from the first quarter of 2022. So it gives us an opportunity to see what has happened over 7 quarters, or what has happened 21-month period starting January 2022 to the end of the 3rd quarter of 2023. So we should keep an eye on the trends rather than leave here with a headline figure of what is unemployment without knowing where we are coming from. The second thing is focusing on the disaggregates. So we're going to share with you the national employment statistics, the national unemployment statistics, but it is imperative for us to look at what is happening across sex, what is happening across different localities, urban, rural areas, what is happening across different subgroups, particularly issues around youth employment and youth unemployment, especially in a system where the government is focusing more on the youth, as we begin to talk about the demographic dividend and tapping the youth bulge that we are seeing as a country now. So the second area is for us to think about the disaggregate rather than what the national figure is. The third thing, which I think it's always important when you're talking about statistics, is don't leave here with only one labor statistic and make a judgment on whether the economy is progressing or not. We're going to share with you different labor statistics, specifically issues around what employment, unemployment is, which all of us are familiar with. But it's important to leave here with other labor statistics and think about the relationships across these labor statistics, specifically if employment and unemployment is showing a particular trend. Ask yourself what is happening to youth that are neither in education, training, or employment, and what is the trend is, and whether we are compromising one labor statistic for the other labor statistic or not. So let us not leave here with one labor statistic and begin to draw judgments that the economy is promising because employment is going up or unemployment is going down. It is important to look at how different labor statistics are performing to get a broader view and make a good judgment of where the economy is when it comes to labor statistics. And the last is what I talked about in terms of the labor transitions. Who is moving to where and what is the net effect? So I go back to our medium-term national development framework. And as I indicated, I want us to put this presentation in that context. So I pick only two quotes from the medium-term national development framework, where numbers are used, or where a suggestion is made that an intervention is going to be put out there, so let's all look for it in terms of how it's going to put out there and when it's going to put out there. So the first quote directs us to what government has done or what government did during the pandemic and how government is instituting policies to ensure that we address the issue of youth unemployment. So in that medium-term national development framework, you see a particular quote that reads, in order to address youth unemployment situation, government provided over 55,000 youths with employable skills and trained 1,597 out of school in soft skills, including leadership. The number of jobs created under the Youth Enterprise Scheme, National Builders Corps, and the National Entrepreneurship Innovation Program exceeded a target of 246,700 as we did 265,463 in 2022. This was a leap of what we did in 2019, where these different interventions led to a creation of 107,576. The essence of these numbers is, as we give you the absolute numbers, I want you to keep these numbers in mind and ask yourself, given where we are now, what would it take if these are the numbers that we are training, if these are the numbers that we are targeting? Obviously, on the back of the COVID-19, government found the need, very commendable, to set up a national unemployment insurance scheme, which obviously is found in other jurisdictions. But the key question is, if you set this up and the target is people who are losing their work, what happens to the issues of transitions that I talked about? So this is a national unemployment insurance scheme for workers, and the expectation is that it should be fully operational in 2024. What this means is that you need to know those who are losing their work, those who are moving outside the labor force to the labor force, either employed or unemployed, for this to be effective. So let's keep these two things in mind as we go through the presentations. So we've all heard the annual household income and expenditure survey. Hitherto, the annual household income and expenditure survey was designed purposely for rebasing our gross domestic product. So every country a reference period, they did some work for either pay or profit, something that they got rewarded either in kind. So within this context, we are talking about our reference period for the data collection for the annual household income and expenditure survey. The third concept that we need to keep in mind is what we call the absorption rate, or in other words, we termed as the employment to the population ratio. And here the population ratio is not the entire population. Here we are talking about the labor force 15 years and older. So once you talk about the absorption rate, you're thinking about the extent to which of those 15 years and older, how many of them are we able to absorb into employment? So we're going to look at whether over time, that is between the first quarter of 2022 to the third quarter of 2023, what has happened to our absorption rate in terms of the proportion of those who are employed in total 15 years and older. We have in the past years, since the 2021 population housing census, stressed the need to go beyond whether the person is employed or not and make an attempt to talk about the characteristics of the employment. So specifically, we talk about a group that is vulnerable employed. And here, the group that is vulnerable employed, our reflection is what is the sustainability or what is the safety net around the work that they do. And we pick two categories of those who are employed. Those who are contributing to family work, so your uncle is doing something, your father is doing something, you tag on and you are part of it. Then the second category is those who are doing what we call your own account. So all the people that we find around today, they decide to go to work. Tomorrow it rains, they don't go to work. A road is blocked, they are not able to go to work because it's own account. It talks about the vulnerability surrounding the work that they do. We think this is very critical if government wants to sustain our employed people over a longer period of time. Then the fifth concept that we talk about is those who are unemployed. So again, keep in mind the reference period, and over the reference period, those who did not do any form of work. They didn't have any work to go to. These people were available for work. We try and draw a distinction between what is called the very strict definition of unemployed and what is called the relaxed definition of unemployed. In the context of the annual household income and expenditure survey, and for that matter, Ghana, since 2015, we've adopted the relaxed approach, and all that it means is that we don't focus on those who did not work, those who are available for work, and those who sought for work. So what we are relaxing here is whether you did seek for work or not. But then you should be available for work. You didn't have work to do over the reference period, and you didn't have any work to go to. So these are the definitions that basically you need to put in mind. A few other concepts to guide our conversation. They might sound new to quite a number of us, but we think it is important for policymakers to go beyond traditional unemployment rate. Once we are following the same cohort of people in every quarter, what we are able to do is to track people that go through an uninterrupted period without employment, which we call the unemployment spell. So if this data is coming from the first quarter of 2022, can we identify people that from the first quarter of 2022 up to the third quarter of 2023, we had people that did not find work to do, although they were available to do some work? This takes us back to the statement that we have in the medium-term national development framework. Because if you want to set up an unemployment insurance scheme, and you are not able to distinguish between people who transition from one economic activity status to another, and those who have consistently remained unemployed over a period of time, then that register that you have for the insurance scheme will be questionable. So in this case, in the report that we're going to release today, we identify people that over that 21-month period, that is between the first quarter of 2022 and the third quarter of 2023, did not do any work. In this presentation, I'm going to go deeper than that and give you different categorizations of people who did not work for different time periods. That is from a 6-month period to the 21-month period. I've talked about labor mobility extensively, so I'm going to skip that. Two other concept definitions that I think is critical for our interpretation of today's release is what happens if you follow the same cohort over a period of time. Here, what we mean by cohort is you have your sample, in this case, 10,800 households. These are households that every quarter we visit. Over the 7 quarters that we visited them, there are people that consistently we have collected data on. Once we identify these people and households that consistently we collect data on, we say we have a balanced panel. This is what allows us to see people who are moving in and out. Because you have these same people that over the 4 quarters, over the 7 quarters you are following. There's this other group of people that you find them in the first quarter. The second quarter, reasons such as migration, reasons obvious to us, they wouldn't be available for the second quarter, so you miss them out of your sample. So you miss people out of your sample, and at some point you need to think about replacing them. So once you have a sample that you cannot follow through all your 7 quarters, we call it an unbalanced panel. So any figure that you see, the first question that you need to ask yourself is this figure being computed based on a balanced panel, which means that you are following the same cohort of people across the 7 quarters, or you are following a representative sample, but not necessarily the same cohort of people over the 7 quarters. So we need to keep this in mind. So in terms of what we've done, as I indicated, this is a quarterly panel survey. It's nationally representative, regionally representative, and also the representative for our urban rural classification. The basis, the sampling frame for the 10,800 that we got was from the 2021 population and housing census. Let's keep in mind, let's leave here with not the population of Ghana, which is in excess of 31 million persons, but the population of only those 15 years and older, which is around 19 million. That is the denominator for the conversation. And also the reference period for this conversation is 7 days preceding the day of the interview. So questions around unemployment, we asked, in the last 7 days, did you work? So that is the reference period for the conversation. We have been successful in maintaining a good response rate across the last 4 quarters, that is from the last quarter of 2022 to the third quarter of 2023. We started replacement in the third quarter of 2023. That is why you see the number of households increasing between the second quarter of 2023 and the third quarter of 2023. So as I indicated, the findings are put into 3 broad categories. I'm going to start with the findings on the labor force characteristics. So the first thing we share with you is think about the constituents of the labor force status. We distinguish between the constituents of the labor force status and the labor force. The labor force, as we indicated, consists of the 2 of the statuses, that is employed and unemployed. The labor force status consists of 3 categories: the employed, unemployed, and those outside the labor force, but 15 years and older. So across the last 7 quarters, that is between the first quarter of 2022 and the third quarter of 2023, we see that we have reduced the persons outside the labor force from 4.95 million to 4.51 million persons. Because this is a set, once people are moving out of outside the labor force, they should find their way in either the employment status or the unemployment status. So the 440 persons that in the first 3 quarters of 2023 exited the outside the labor force, over 60% of them, precisely about 250,000 of them, went into the employed status. and the remaining into the unemployed status. So from these three constituents' point of view, we see a reduction in outside the labor force of persons, approximately 440,000 persons, and because this is a set of three categories of people, you need to find where they are going to over the same period. And over this same period of the 440,000 persons, that is the reduction from 4.95 million to 4.51 million, most of these people, precisely more than 60%, found themselves in the employed status. Obviously, this is what we want. If we had a greater percentage getting into the unemployed status, then it's going to get us concerned. It means they were outside the labor force, they were not available to work, but when they made themselves available to work, more than 60% of them found work to do. That is why we have about 250,000 of them being in the employment status. The second is over the 7-quarter period. So keep in mind, as I said earlier on, this is a release on the first 3 quarters of 2023. There are instances we give you the picture for 2023, and there are instances that because we want a longer trend, we start from the first quarter of 2022 when the actual data collection exercise started. So here we present 2 statistics. One is what we call the labor force participation rate. Think about the 2 categories of labor force. That goes into your numerator. Those employed, those not employed, and your denominator is people 15 years and older. That is what your labor force participation rate does. Your absorption rate, instead of keeping in the numerator both employed and unemployed, has only persons employed in the numerator. That is why we call it the employment to your population ratio. And consistently, since the 2nd quarter of 2022, we've seen a steady increase in our absorption rate, but by precisely 5.6 percentage points, since the 2nd quarter of 2022 up to the 3rd quarter of 2023. So it's consistent with the first slide that we saw, which we realized that in the first 3 quarters of 2023, the reduction outside the labor force was absorbed more by employment. And if you stretch this conversation to the absorption rate, that is employment to population ratio, consistently from the 2nd quarter of 2022 to the 3rd quarter of 2023, we've seen a steady increase in our absorption rate, specifically by 5.6 percentage points. Unemployment rate by sex. 2 highlights on this. We see the dominance of female unemployment, but as I indicated in my introductory remark, the major thing we need to avert our minds to is the trend. Let's see what is happening between the last quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023, where we saw a sharper dip in female unemployment rate relative to male unemployment rate between the last quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023. This is the first time Ghana is following the same cohort of people to get a sense of our labor statistics. It might be too early to draw conclusions, but what comes to mind here is how females get into employment during the festive seasons. That is why at the end of the presentation, the coordinator will tell us that going forward, we're going to do thematic reports that would help us narrow down on what exactly these females were doing when they exited unemployment status between the last quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023. That is why it's important we don't leave here with levels, we leave here with an understanding of, over a period of time, what is happening across different disaggregated groups. We look at this from a locality point of view. Our unemployment is urban driven, again following the seasonality around the festive period that we saw a much bigger gap between unemployment for urban areas and unemployment for rural areas. We turn the conversation to unemployment across the 16 administrative regions. We saw earlier the trends in unemployment at a time that in the third quarter of 2023, we had an unemployment figure nationally of 14.6%. total unemployed population. So really, the government is getting it right by tackling youth unemployment, because it constitutes more than 3/4 of the population that is unemployed. But in terms of the numbers that we are targeting, it's a bit distant from the population of the youth that is unemployed. From a youth unemployment rate, using the two definitions, the international definition, 15 to 24 years, the Africa-Ghana definition, 15 to 35 years, as we expect, the youth unemployment rate for the 15 to 24 age bracket will be higher than the 15 to 35 age bracket, simply because as you expand the age, the likelihood of people getting employment is high. Again, the take-home message is a historical perspective. So here we put into context the 2021 population and housing census. From the 2021 population and housing census, being cognizant of the fact that one is a census, one is a survey, we recorded about 32.8% for the age bracket 15 to 24 years, and now we are recording a percentage of 29.7, a marginal increase of about 2.5 percentage points. Also, we see a marginal increase for the age group 15 to 35 years, as we recorded. We see an increase for the age bracket 15 to 35 years, as we recorded 19.7 in the 2021 population and housing census, relative to 21.7 for the annual household income and expenditure survey. We turn to the characteristics of those who are experiencing unemployment spell. I'll speak to this slide and come back to the earlier one. So as was indicated, because we are following the same cohort of people over time, we are able to track those who have remained in a particular economic activity status over that period of time, in this case, the 21-month period from January 2022 to the end of the third quarter in 2023. So we are able to follow people over different time periods. People that have been unemployed for only 2 quarters, that is a 6-month period, simply the second quarter of 2023 and the third quarter of 2023. People who have been unemployed for 9 months, which is the first quarter of 2023 to the third quarter of 2023, and this conversation can be stretched for those who have been unemployed from the first quarter of 2023, that is January 2022, to the end of the third quarter in 2023. And we found that we have in excess 1.2 million people, approximately 1.3 million people that have remained unemployed for a 6-month period. That is in the second quarter and third quarter of 2023. This number reduces to about 752,000 if you want to think about people that up until the end of the third quarter of 2023, those that the whole year of 2023, they had remained unemployed. So 752,000 people, as at the end of the third quarter of 2023, the whole of the year were unemployed. You stretch the conversation. Those who were unemployed as at the end of the last quarter of 2022 to the end of the third quarter of 2023, we found about 191,000 persons who remained unemployed. Once you stretch the conversation to the end of the last quarter of 2022, to the end of the third quarter of 2023, you are talking about a 12-month window. So for a 12-month period, we had about 191,000 people who stayed unemployed. This is where the conversation should start in terms of not what the number is, but the characteristics of these people. So we go back and look at the characteristics of these people. This is where we find people who have master's degrees, tertiary people who remain unemployed for a 12-month period. So the first headline story is finding about a quarter of those who are in the unemployed spell category having tertiary education and remaining unemployed. Again, once we do the thematic report, it's going to provide us with further insights. So here what we are showing is, do we have a higher percentage of females? And the answer is yes. Do we have a higher percentage of them in urban areas? So you look at the disaggregate of those who have remained unemployed over a 12-month period, over an 18-month period, over a 21-month period, and tell policymakers to direct their attention to these categories of persons. Keep in mind the rationale for the presentation. Relationships across different labor statistics, not picking one labor statistic and making a judgment on whether the country is on a path of recovery or the country is on a downslide. We turn to the conversation around those outside the labor force and think about why they are outside the labor force. A number of reasons were alluded. We focus on two of them. People who are in full-time education and how this has changed across different quarters. So if you look at those who are in full-time education and you look at the changes between quarter 1 and quarter 2 of 2023 and quarter 2 and quarter 3 of 2023, you clearly see that its effect on the labor force market varies across these two time periods. And again, the early signal is that between the first and second quarters of 2023, it coincides with the academic calendar for most of our educational levels, while the change between the second quarter and the third quarter coincides with the vacation period. If we begin to process labor statistics alongside other economic indicators, it's going to point government to different interventions that can be instituted. In this case, how we begin to think about harnessing vacation jobs, putting a structure around it so that we can really ensure some absorption to a highest extent during the vacation period that we have. The second highlight is those who worked but are not employed. We recall the definition of employment. You had some economic activity to pursue, to produce a good, to provide a service of which a pay, profit, in-kind payment was associated with it. Strict definition of employment. I'm happy through the United Nations Development Program, ILO, a conversation really has started for us to begin to think about how we can transition very well between people who only work, possibly doing volunteerism work without pay, so they don't fit into the definition of employment, but are doing some kind of work. And the conversation around employment. Because these are people that we find outside the labor force. They worked but not employed. Because what they did was not associated with pay, profit, or some in-kind payment, but some work was done. We need to be deliberate about getting people that transition between these two categories. Another labor statistic closely related to government's focus on the youth is our youth that are not in education, employment, and training. What has happened over the last 7 quarters? First quarter 2022 to third quarter 2023. 6 interquartile stages between Q1, Q2 of 2022, Q2, Q3 of 2022, right down to Q2, Q3 of 2023. 6 different interquartile experiences. In 4 out of the 6, we see the need going down. It's only in 2 out of the 6 that we see an increase of the population or the rate of our youth that are not in education, employment, nor training. Clearly, this is pointing to some positive signs. Because even if you look at an end-to-end calculation, that is from the first quarter of 2022 to the third quarter of 2023, you see that drop. But once you do the trend, it gives policymakers an opportunity to analyze what happened in the two time periods where the youth that is not in employment, education, nor training went up. Specifically between the periods of the second quarter and third quarter of 2023, and most recently, the last two quarters of 2023, that is the second and third quarter of 2023. We look at this across the 16 administrative regions. The headline story, they vary across the 16 administrative regions. One more time, Greater Accra stands out. Greater Accra remains the only region that across the 7 quarters records a youth rate, that is those not in education, employment, nor training, higher than the national average. Going back to the earlier point on unemployment, where we found Greater Accra and Ashanti region recording rates higher than the national average across the 7 quarters. But Greater Accra, in both cases, that is from the perspective of needs and the perspective of unemployment, record rates higher than the national average and the 15 administrative regions. Vulnerable employment. We keep in mind, these people are working, but the kind of work that they are doing is either their own work, own account employment, one-man work, or they are contributing to family work. We've consistently recorded about 2/3 of the employment population right from the census through to the annual household income and expenditure survey. This figure has hovered around 2/3 of the employed population that are into vulnerable employment. But once you narrow down on the regional disaggregation, across the 7 quarters, consistently we find OT, Northeast, and Savannah regions recording the highest rate of vulnerable employment. Our focus here is to get government to look at the disaggregate and where we have the intensity of the different labor statistics to inform the appropriate interventions. We turn to the second bit of the findings, where we do the year-on-year and the quarter-on-quarter computations. So for us to appreciate how we do this, just keep in mind that the data has been collected following the same cohort of people from the first quarter of 2022 to the third quarter of 2023. So when we use the phrase year-on-year, all that we are doing is that we take one quarter last year. In this case, we can take the first quarter of 2022 and look at the change that has happened in a year's time, that is the first quarter of 2023. So first quarter of 2022, first quarter of 2023 is what gives us a year-on-year computation. We can do the same for the second quarter of 2022 and the second quarter of 2023 because the data is available. Equally do the same for the third quarter of 2022 and third quarter of 2023. So that is the thinking around the computation of year-on-year labor statistics. Quarter-on-quarter labor statistics is simply looking at one quarter over another quarter. In this case, we can look at the second quarter of 2023 relative to the third quarter of 2023. So it's within the same calendar year, but we are looking at differences from 2 different quarters. Second quarter of 2023 and third quarter of 2023, quarter-on-quarter changes. What we are not doing in this presentation is annualized labor statistics. But once we finish 2023 as a calendar year and we are able to do weight adjustment across the different quarters, we should be able to come up with yearly labor statistics, annualized labor statistics, which will be different from year-on-year labor statistics. So here, year-on-year labor statistics is comparing a quarter in the previous year with a quarter in the current year. So we look at year-on-year number of employed persons. So we compare Q1 2022, Q1 2023. we see a figure of about 471,000 increase. So the number of persons that joined the employment status between the first quarter of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023 was 471,000. This number shot up to 747,000 between the second quarter of 2022 and the second quarter of 2023. Definitely these numbers are consistent with what we saw earlier on in terms of the increases in employment over time and the absorption rate that we saw, and reduced marginally when you compare the third quarter of 2022 and the third quarter of 2023. We turn the conversation to quarter on quarter. So as we indicated, we have data on 7 quarters. So if you want to calculate a quarter on quarter, you can get it for 6 quarters. So you can start with Q1, Q2 in 2022, where we saw a dip in the number of employed persons. A reversal of that was recorded between the second quarter and third quarter of 2022. It went up to 214,000 persons. Another dip in the number of persons that were employed were recorded between the third and fourth quarters of 2022. The story that we're seeing for 2023, which is consistent with the first slide that we show, is that in the whole of 2023, consistently we are recording an increase in quarter-on-quarter number of persons employed, although the rate of increase declines from Q1 to Q3. Quarter-on-quarter percentage change in the number of employed persons. The first slide that we show had to do with the absolute numbers of persons across the different quarters. And here what we are showing is the percentage change of those absolute numbers. So on a year-on-year basis, we see an increase of 7.9%. That is between the third quarter of 2022 and the third quarter of 2023. On a year-on-year basis, we see 7.9%. But if you put this in the 4 different quarters, we saw an increase of these numbers in the first 3 quarters, quarter-on-quarter, and a dip in the last quarter. How does this pan out in our 16 administrative regions? Number of employed persons. Let's keep in mind, nationally, number of employed persons are going up. At the regional level, the storyline is different. 10 out of the 16 administrative regions record a decrease. On quarter between the second quarter of 2023 and the third quarter of 2023. This gives reasons why we always need to move away from the national. So while at the national level, we are recording an increase in the number of employed persons in all 3 quarters of 2023. Once you do the disaggregate at the regional level, 10 out of the 16 administrative regions record a reduction. Indeed, because of the dominance of Greater Accra, which is part of the 6 countries that record an increase, is a major contributing factor to why at the national level we see an increase. The storyline is different for males and females. We turn the conversation away from employed persons to those that are unemployed on a quarter-on-quarter basis. So on a quarter-on-quarter basis, in the 4 out of the 6 interquartile ranges across the 7 quarters, we saw a dip 4 times for unemployment across these 6 times. And unemployment only reduced in 2 out of the 6 times. What does the regional story say? Again, we have some regions, specifically 8 of our regions, with the Northeast region recording the highest worsening of unemployment on a quarter-on-quarter basis between the second quarter of 2023 and the third quarter of 2023. Northeast records a rate of about 61.6%. In the domain of males, it records a rate of about 91%, and in the domain of females, it records a rate of about 51%. The extent to which unemployment worsened in the Northeast region on a quarter-on-quarter basis, specifically between the second and third quarters of 2023. Labor transitions. So this is where a conscious attempt is made to follow the same cohort of people over the first three quarters of 2023. And we look at this across the three different economic activities. The three different economic activities are those who are employed, are those who are unemployed, and those outside the labor force. So these are the three categories, and for each of these three categories, we look at how people have transitioned over the first three quarters of 2023. At the beginning of 2023, from an employment perspective, we had about 9.4 million people that transitioned from the last quarter of 2022 into the first quarter of 2023. 9.4 million persons. Out of these 9.4 million persons, some of them will remain in employment, some of them would go to outside the labor force category, and some of them would go into the unemployed category. So our interest here is people living into the different categorizations. So across this period, we saw that about more than half of them, of those who entered the first quarter of 2023, remained employed in the second quarter of 2023. So we had about 530,000. The first population that we talk about is 9.4 million. Last quarter of 2022, entering first quarter of 2023. Out of that, you have about 530,000 of them that remained employed in the first quarter of 2023. The interest here is, would you keep all these 530 throughout the quarters of 2023? Then in the second quarter of 2023, of the 530, we have more than half, specifically about 280,000 of them that remains employed. So the essence of the labor transition is to get government that if you are really thinking about an unemployment insurance scheme, this is the data that we need to tap into by asking ourselves, of the 9.4 million, the 530,000 that remained, how many of them, about the 530,000 that went into unemployment, how many of them remained unemployed? And for those who remained in employment, which was about 8.2 million of them, how many of them consistently remain employed? What is important about this labor transition is not just those who exit, but those who exit, re-enter, and re-exit. So what you see happening between the second and third quarters of 2023 is you have about 160,000 people who are leaving unemployment status through into the employment status. Where they came from the last quarter of 2022, can easily be traced. We turn the conversation to the second economic status, where we have those just a second. Where we have those that entered the unemployment status from the last quarter of 2022. So from the last quarter of 2022, we had about 940,000 people that entered into 2023 first quarter that were unemployed. Of these, again, the conversation is how many of them remained unemployed, how many of them gained employment, and how many of them went outside the labor force. So here what we clearly see is that we have about 60,000 people that between the second quarter of 2023 and the third quarter of 2023 left the unemployed status to the employed status. Of these, some of them came from outside the labor force, and some of them came from the employment status, and some of them remained unemployed from the last quarter of 2022. So what these labor transitions helps us to do, as I indicated, in the context of an unemployment insurance scheme, is to find out people who are working that can contribute to the scheme, and those who have remained unemployed and cannot contribute to the scheme. And for that reason, for such people, what interventions do we put in place for them? Then the third category, as I indicated, are those who from the last quarter of 2022 were outside the labor force and entered 2021 first quarter being outside the labor force. Again, keep in mind that these are people that can remain outside the labor force, these are people that can gain employment, and these are people that would go into the unemployed status. Of this group, that is the 4.79 million people that were outside the labor force in the last quarter of 2022 into the first quarter of 2023, 540,000 of them went into the unemployed category. And of this 540,000 of them, 410,000 of them remained unemployed in the second quarter of 2023. Some moved into the employed status, as I indicated, specifically 1.23 million out of the 4.79 million that moved from the last quarter into the first quarter of 2023 outside the labor force. With these, and keeping in mind the preamble to the presentation, we see that absorption rate is increasing. Not in education, employment, training is reducing. Both show promising signs. However, unemployment records an upward trend. This is the basis for us to be circumspect in using one labor statistic in drawing a conclusion that the economy is on a path of recovery or is on a downslide, given that either of these labor statistics are showing a positive trend. Clearly, with these variations in the labor statistics, we need to begin to ask questions around the preparedness of persons in entering the labor market, whether they are entering the labor market with the requisite skills and so on and so forth, whether people are transitioning from one category to the other, should inform the policy formulation when we want to have a conversation around labor statistics. We have emphasized several times that unemployment issues, NEET issues, vary significantly across the 16 administrative regions, so it's potentially erroneous to think about a one-size-fits-all intervention. We clearly saw from the reasons outside the labor market in terms of those in full-time education and what is happening to groups that are working and groups that are in employment. So this is the time that, as a country, our conversations should rally around the calendar of other events, specifically in this case, our education calendar in terms of labor policies, and also how we consciously get people to transition from work to employment. Our conversations around job creation would not be complete if we don't talk through those who exit different economic status, those who re-enter different economic activity status, and those who re-exit different economic activity status. Indeed, if we want to actualize what we have in our medium-term national development framework, we definitely need to begin to think about how the Ministry of Employment, Labor Relations, and Ghana Statistical Service can really work hand in hand so that we can get administrative data to speak to surveys and censuses. Otherwise, interventions such as the unemployment insurance scheme that is laudable would rest on data sets that will be at the superficial level, either only administrative data or only survey data, without we really understanding what is happening when people are moving across different labor, different economic activity statuses. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. We'll now call on Mr. Amwa, Director of Research from the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations, to give us a statement.
Good morning. I didn't hear you. Good morning. I hope all of you are doing well. Right. Thank you very much, Prof, for the nice presentation. And before I start, I would like to apologize on behalf of the Minister responsible for Employment, Labor Relations, and Pensions for his inability to be here. You know, as always, that he is very passionate about this kind of exercise. And I will just go straight to the point. The presentation, and Prof, if you recall, after the first AHIS, and even the second one, we've had a series of engagements on how best we can use the report, and we've done a lot of things. And as a ministry, one of the things, or our main goal, is to ensure decent work for Ghanaians within the country and then abroad. And when we talk of decent work, we are talking about employment conditions, we are talking about rights at the workplace, we are talking about social security, and then social dialogue. So it's very important that we look at the report holistically, as Prof said, disaggregate it, and then use it for the right purpose. A typical example is the area of vulnerable employment. We, as a ministry, if you are talking of decent work, and we realize that from the report, you have more people in vulnerable employment, and then their own account workers. It tells you that in terms of social protection, they have a challenge. And as a ministry, one of the things we are doing through the National Pensions Regulatory Authority and then the SNET is the introduction of informal sector pensions. And I believe that this particular report will help us actually know where they are and then improve upon what they are supposed, upon their social protection in the way of pensions. So basically, that's what we are going to do. And as I said, we are also trying to, one of the things we did with the previous AHIS is we are trying to come up with, expand public employment services to the districts. And in setting up the new public employment centers, one of the things we looked at is the number of people who are employed. In fact, areas where you have more people who are unemployed as one of the criteria for citing the public employment centers, because it would not make sense to go and cite it where you have less people who actually need that particular service. And what the public service centers usually do, or normally do, is jobs matching. And in terms of ensuring decent work, one of the things also is the rights at work, which means the Labor Department has to do the inspections. But if they are involved in vulnerable employment, then it means a lot of things may go wrong, right? Do they even, if those who are not own account workers, but in other sectors, in terms of the, how do you call it? In terms of how they are even able to unionize, it's very, very important to us. So Prof, what we will do is that we will actually study as the report, as we always do. We'll meet with the Statistical Service, try and then improve upon whatever we do through the findings of the report, and then I'm sure everything will be fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. George Amwa. We now call on Professor William Babwateng from the University of Ghana to give us a reaction.
Thank you very much. I have 10 minutes reaction. But let me say that in Ghana, what I've realized that if institutions are not performing, I think we are quick to lambast them. But over the past 3 or 4 years, Ghana Statistical Service has done something which many institutions have not done. And I think they need commendation. I'm saying this because somewhere in 2010, thereabout, Parliament, there was a question in Parliament that we should know the unemployment rate, number of jobs created, and so on. At that time, I was doing some galamsey at Ministry of Employment. I was a consultant there through Danida. And I was asked to prepare something for them. And I told the minister then, my body, Honorable E.T. Mensah, who just passed, that, Honorable, we don't have data. The data we have is up to 2006. And I remember in some of the questions that were coming, I was in Parliament drafting something small for him to respond. And in 2018 or so, the economic management team, headed by the vice president, invited Ghana Statistical Service to come and tell them whether they can provide quarterly data on employment, labor issues, and so on. And I was invited to come and make contribution. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And I'm happy that we are not having annual data, but we are having quarterly data on employment, which doesn't happen. So I would have loved to have the vice president here, that the vision that he had somewhere in 2018 has come to fruition. And Statistical Service needs a lot of support to do more. Now, my second comment, reaction, will be the interpretation of the data. I am begging, if I can use that word, pleading with the media that when you take the report, please read the concept before you interpret it. Social commentators, please read the concept, the definitions, before you interpret it. I think, GS, I once called you. I was going to the office and I switched to one of the radio stations and they were discussing one of the reports. And they were discussing NEET, not in employment, education, and training. And the conclusion was that, young people in Ghana, over 2 point something million, they have no skills. They have nothing. They are not working. They have no skills. And luckily enough, I had the host number. So I sent a text message that, no, you are misrepresenting the data. So I said, I want to speak. You have to pay me for that anyway. And then I spoke, and I said, no, the need doesn't mean that the people don't have skills. No. We are talking about young people, and we divided them into those who are employed, doing something, employed. Those who are in school, full-time education. And if we want something to be done for them, these people are not the ones that we have to focus on. Because young people, those who are working and are employed, they are fine. Those who are in school, we have to support them. But those who are not in employment, those who are not in any education, not even any training, these are the people we need to look at. And you can break those people down to see those who have some secondary education, those who have some primary education or basic education, and so on. So I tried to explain for about 15 minutes. But after my explanation, it was still not clear because it depends on the one who is interpreting. So maybe the one who was trying to make it look like things are so bad thought maybe I have disposed of his. So I think we need to interpret the data very, very well. The other point that I want us to look at in terms of interpreting is the reference period. the reference period. So when we are interpreting the data, we are talking about the data and we say 14.7% unemployment rate. We should refer it to the third quarter of 2023. We shouldn't say currently, as I stand here, is 14.7. No. It is the third quarter of last year. And we also have to note that the people that we asked, the information we were getting from the people was about reference period last 7 days. Last 7 days. And that is something that we need to look at as we interpret the data. We shouldn't only focus on just unemployment rates, employment, and so on. But indeed, the transition is very important. I know we may think transition is more important for policymakers, but also important for those of us who are going to talk about it. Because anytime I talk about data, I just say it's not static. It moves in the hospital. As we stand here, somebody is leaving us to eternity. So even the population, people are moving out and people are coming in. You start from 2022, first quarter, somebody was, let's say, 15 years, or let's say 14 years. He's not part of the working age population. When you come to 2023, that person will be what? 15 years. He enters the working age population. It has implication. Employment is going up. Unemployment may be going up. So we have to look at those who are outside the labor force. And I was happy that we break the outside the labor force into different components. Those who are doing some work, but by the nature of their work, we can't say they are employed. We need to look at those people, because they may be contributing something, but the definition that we have picked up, we need to break them down and say, how many of these people are in rural areas? How many of these people are in urban areas? How many of them are in OT, or in Upper West, or in Upper East, or in Greater Accra? It is very important that we break them down into regions that have been done, and then when we are interpreting, we interpret it from that perspective. One striking thing with this data, which is consistent from, I think, 2017, is unemployment rate still higher among females than males. And it has been consistent. I was praying, this time it's not that policy, praying that it will change. But that should also tell us the interpretation we need to look at, because from 2017 till now, and we have the same kind of situation, we have to find answers to it. And one interpretation that I have found, it could be the right one, it could not be the right one, is that in the past, you see that women, and allow me to use women, not females, women were always in domestic activities, domestic care, housewives. And even in school, when you get to middle school in those days, say, oh, go and give birth. You don't have to go up. But now we've been able to move up. And when you look at educational attainment, you see that females have gone up drastically. The moment women are going to school, when they leave school, they have to look for what? Work. Is the labor market prepared for them? So now if education has realized that women need education as men, now is the labor market also ready to get women to work as men? We need to interrogate that. Because when you break occupations, you will see that women dominate in the elementary and those low-level occupations, while men dominate in the professionals and so that, like engineering. How many women are in engineering? Such that if you want people to go into mining, into the mining proper, we get women there. How many women are civil engineers? They are doing civil engineering. And therefore, if you want women to go into that area, you will get them. Are we only encouraging our women to go into nursing? So these are conversations that the report should bring out. And I'm very happy that there's going to be some thematic reports. So as time goes on, we will be here to talk about underemployment. We will be here to talk about formal and informal employment, and the gender pay gaps. GS, we need to bring that kind of analysis in terms of where are our women in terms of the type of work, the vulnerable employment, and so on. We will break them down, not only female, male, but in terms of even age. So we crossed up the age and then the gender to be able to know which age bracket are our women down there, or which age bracket should we focus our discussions on. My last point will be the unemployment spell, which is very important. The unemployment spell brings out something important. The data he shows that the longer the period, the smaller the number of people who are in unemployment spell, which is in line with the global trend. So that also shows that, yes, unemployment is a big issue and we are all concerned. But we should know that whatever the case is, if you are able to educate yourself, it will be longer, but whatever it is, you will get employed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bulletin, Head of Department Economics, University of Ghana. It's now time for our questions, reactions, and comments. There will be mics going around, so if you have a question or a contribution or comment, just raise your hand, and then please, we'll take a set of 5, and then we'll address it, and then please.
Thank you very much. My name is Isaac from NAT. I also want to take the opportunity to commend the Ghana Statistical Service, and more especially Prof. I think you are doing a very good job this time around. My namesake, Prof. Ba, you spoke about breaking the thing down. I would also want to suggest that you consider sectors, so that, for instance, in education service, we need to get some figures. Recently, we were trying to identify deprived communities, and it was very tough. I would want to suggest that if those things come from the Ghana Statistical Service, it will be more acceptable and recognized than individuals or some people trying to, get it. So I want to suggest that one. My man from the ministry, I was happy to hear you say you are trying to make sure you get pension for the informal sector. I want to also let you know that even those in the formal sector, we are suffering. Yes. We are suffering because for 8 months now, our tier 2 has not been paid. And you know the repercussion. So as you consider the informal sector, please, what you have already established, pay attention to it. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I'm from the Ministry of Gender. My name is Sylvester Chejemfi. I am curious, about how some people were able to survive within the labor transition zone. It's kind of zigzag. Some enter, some drop. But I'm sure there were a group that were still within throughout the quarters. So my interest is, how were these guys, how were they able to cope with the system and stay within the employment zone? What are their characteristics? Are they males, females? Is it age? I just want to know about that. Because if you're able to know how these guys, these people, forgive me for my guys, were able to be fit within the area, then we'll be able to use their strength to, help the others who fell along the line. Now, the other one is with what Prof talked about, interpretation. Since this is kind of a quarterly presentation, it means that Ghana Statistical Service needs enough funds in order to sustain the various reports in the various quarters. And so now we've had the quarters up to this point. Do we have any plans in place to ensure that we don't get in the middle somewhere where we're not able to provide, more of a report for the various quarters ahead of us? Because when we stop at a point, we cannot report on them. Thank you.
Here's any more comments? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, Prof. Please, I have a number of questions, so pardon me. I think where the senior man here ended is important. Sorry, my name is Edem Kujo. I'm with the media. First of all, I remember when we launched this IS somewhere last year, early part of last year, if I remember, we said it was a 2 or 3 year plan. I remember that's what Prof said, that we had some support and that was the plan. And so this question comes in. We are almost done with the second quarter. We are almost done with the fourth quarter of 2023. Probably we'll do another year. Have we put plans in place to ensure that it continues? So that's the first question that I want to raise. So we are in February of 2024, but we are now seeing data for between first quarter 2023, 2022, 2023, second quarter, and then third quarter. Looking at the time lag, does it not affect the urgency in policy? As Prof. William Babwatin says, data is very, very dynamic. You could put out the data, and because we have moved 6 months ahead, the dynamics would have changed in terms of guiding policy decisions. So what do we make of this time lag? Is it a problem, and how best can it help us? The final question, I also go back to something Professor William Babwatin said, that it was the vice president in 2018 to do quarterly data. We are seeing, and I'm sure media people would have picked this up a lot, that Ghana Fiscal Service can put out a figure, but we don't see our politicians or people we expect to guide policy speak to those data. I remember somewhere last year when people went on a demonstration talking about unemployment, a response that came from a big figure within the ruling party was that an ILO's data also unemployment rate was 3.9%. Meanwhile, there is an official body mandated to collect statistics locally who had put a figure of around 13.4% at the same time. When such utterances are made publicly, does it not, as a body or agency, undermine what exactly you are doing and even the conversation to get a policy to work around it? And as an agency, are you just not putting figures out in the hope that they come for it, when in reality, the politicians or the policymakers would not pick the data that you have worked with, but would use some data that either collected by somebody who they say is their research guy at their office or somewhere? How do we just oppose this to ensure that you are not just putting figures out in the public and then it's not affecting policy and it's not even driving discourse that ought to be done? Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Benjamin Amwa, and I'm from the University of Ghana Business School. The presentation that we just had, I don't know, I don't have the details of the full report, but my concern is we didn't see any public sector, private sector dynamics in the presentation. And I would love to see how the transitions are taking place between the public to private or private to public. I don't know if you have something like that in there or it is something you are yet to do. If you are not yet to do, then maybe going forward, you may want to consider that. Two, do you have anything like the waiting period? How long it takes an individual, right, to probably maybe lose a job and then hopefully get a job. I'm saying this because in the graph that you showed, between 6 months all the way to 21 months, we saw the numbers reducing. Reducing based on what? So one would like to have an idea as to the waiting period. That is, if you should find yourself unemployed. And then the last one is the rural-urban dynamics. I saw Greater Accra carrying some huge numbers in terms of the unemployment. Again, we could not link that to the gains or the employment that are probably left in the other regions, because it's all possible that in the mobility and transitions, they are transiting down to maybe Greater Accra. That is creating a problem in Greater Accra, or maybe something is happening. That is how come Greater Accra is recording way above national average unemployment, and then some of the other regions may be having positive employment rate, simply because labor mobility is keeping labor off some of these regions, and then they are coming to do pressure on the jobs available in Accra. So these are my few comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me try and respond to some of them, and I'll start from yours. Then when you say labor mobility, there are different types of labor mobility. Mobility within sectors or across sectors, and mobility across locations. Remember, this data is about panel. So if we go to OT, a household is there. We follow that household throughout. The data is not looking at migration from maybe one point to the other. You may have Greater Accra being highest in terms of employment, unemployment, because when you talk about urbanization, Greater Accra is more urbanized than the others. So that also explains some of them. So we need to look at the data, what the data is. This is a panel data. We are looking at the household in a particular area and so on. Maybe you can support us to look at issues related to migration here and there and so on. You talk about the waiting period and so on. In this presentation, he spoke about spell, unemployment spell. So that tells you how long have you been unemployed. That's the unemployment duration. That answers the question about how long have you been waiting. You see that some waited for 3 months, some about 1 year, some about 6 months, and so on. That shows you how long these people have been unemployed for that period. So that is the spell. Now, public sector, private sector. If you look at your program, that is May 2024. That is where we will answer your question. There will be another release that will go deeper into the private, public, formal and informal, deeper, and so on. So that one, you don't have a problem. Now, Senior, about politicians, policymakers using data and so on. Ghana Statistical Service is the institution mandated to collect and publish data on Ghana. That's the first one. But everybody had the liberty to look at data elsewhere, so long as you make reference to it. So the one who is listening. So if we say unemployment rate is 3%, and you know that you are unemployed, then it's up to you. So you cannot force anybody to pick any data from anywhere. I will be sad if you pick data from Ghana Statistical Service and it is not the data that Ghana Statistical Service published. So in that case, I will be sad. But you can pick data from anywhere. I can also collect data, do analysis as an academic, and publish. Somebody can pick it up. But I don't have that mandate to do that. I've done that, published, and I've gotten mine. So if you look at ILO data unemployment, you all use it for our publication. It is based on estimates. Based on estimates. But what Statistical Survey does, they are not based on estimates. They are based on going to the people and asking questions and so on. So it's up to you, the media, to then go and refer to what Ghana Statistical Service has published and say that, well, this is the institution mandated to collect and publish data. So, so you can have that discussion. And I'm happy to tell you everything that they have done, and he said it, they didn't say it anywhere to do it. They consulted a lot of stakeholders were involved in coming up with the questions, analysis, everything. So if it comes to peer review, it has been done. The only thing is that they have taken our job, the one that we do to live to, Statistical has taken it. Now, time lag, that is important. But just to tell you that globally, depending on the data, you cannot get data instantly. Because even in the US or in Europe, you cannot get data instantly. So for employment data, we are in the first quarter of 2024. I got to know GDP recession, recently in UK, that they are talking about December. You understand? So they are talking about December, the last quarter of last year, their GDP came down here and there. So there's always time lag. I think if the Ghana Statistical Service is able to get the support that they need, I can tell you, maybe the lag will be just 1 quarter, as happens elsewhere. But the last quarter, which is September, and we are in February, I don't think the time lag is too much. And when you look at the trend that were presented, the dynamics, the change is not that much. But you can support Ghana Statistical Service to be able to reduce the time lag. Now, there was also a question about deprived areas and so on. Well, this statistics and this data is different from perhaps what the deprived area Ghana Education Service is talking about. We are talking about employment and unemployment, where they are. Maybe another time something can be done to identify areas that are known to be deprived. And deprived must be defined. You must define deprived. Because me, I'm deprived. But it depends on how you define deprived. So if GS has something to add, GS, you can add.
I refuse to comment on the deprivation. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm pretty excited with the questions that have come up. The only reason is that I begin to see a change in the narrative of labor statistics. So people are now asking questions to issues that, from our point of view, we think is critical. Professor Bulletin, thank you for the responses. So I'm going to try and look at things from a perspective. What we are going to release today in terms of the hard copy document is a bulletin. The service has different forms of publications. We start with something basic as fact sheets, something basic as scorecards, something basic as bulletin, and then we graduate to thematic briefs, thematic reports, analytical reports, and monographs. What we've done today is just at the very basic level, and we look forward, as Professor Bulletin indicated, to do some thematic reports and even do some analytical reports. Towards the end, the coordinator will tell you some of the presentations or releases that we're going to do in the next 6 months. Indeed, our request here is we need collaborators to go beyond the thematic briefs. The essence of the bulletin and the thematic brief is to put the numbers there as it is and do a little of the policy work. But once we start doing the thematic reports and the analytical reports, that is where we want a lot of policy engagement. Quite a number of you here have been part of the writing of the thematic reports and the analytical reports from the 2021 Population and Housing Census. This is a very rich data that is sitting there. Most of the things that you talked about, we have a module on school to work transition, which will give us further information on the unemployment spell in terms of the duration. We can easily respond to the issue of employment, occupation, as you indicated, the private sector, public sector. All that data is sitting there. Ghana Statistical Service cannot exhaust the data. So we really need buy-in from development partners, from government MDAs. They should come on board with their project, with their policy document, and tell us that this is what they want to do. The micro data will be made available. That is why we've built a statistical online bank. But once you are writing an analytical report, we want you to go beyond the micro data and use all available data set that sits with the service to answer the numerous challenges that we face as a country. Prof, again, thank you for highlighting the issue of data use. Adam, we really are putting forward an advocacy. Ghana Statistical Service is for the public. Ghana Statistical Service is not for only policymakers. That is why we've strengthened our engagement with the media and the general public. Please, we want you to do the advocacy work for us. Look at the policy document, and that is the leading we are providing for you. With all our releases, we point you to the policy document, which has numbers, and we release the statistics. So what we want the media to do now is to take it up and say that, no, there's some disparity, there's some inconsistency. As you rightly said, these are government agencies, all of us are government agencies. We need to come together and sit. And thankfully, this is happening at a time that the World Bank has provided this project for us that is bringing all of us, government ministries, together to harmonize statistics and improve statistics across all the MDAs. And that is why we are strengthening the statistical profiling of government policy documents. So we really need you to get all of us to really look at data use from a different perspective rather than just two institutions doing that. The characteristics of unemployment spell, Sylvester, we can definitely do that for you. As I showed in the slide, we can show you the sex, we can show you the different demographics, urban, rural, age groups, education, and so on. And there's a lot we can do with that, but we don't want to do it for the sake of it. We keep saying this. It's not statistical service that has to define the statistics for this country. It's policymakers that have to tell us that this is what we need, and we will produce the statistics. Until we get that coordinated effort as a country to determine the statistics that we need, we'll be doing things based on what we think is right, and we'll be oblivious of what policies are, which is not right. That is why this year we are pushing for a data revolution agenda, a national strategy for the development of statistics, so that all of us will know the data gaps that we have across the different sectors and produce the right data. The question on financial sustainability is critical. I'm not going to run away from it. It's been a major headache for the service. In the last 20 or so years, I might be wrong, we've had what I call droughts of data collection, because we've had instances where, like we are experiencing now, we have development partners helping us with the production of our statistics, get into a period where we don't have funding coming, all these 9 statistics would end, and then we get another funding, and we cannot continue on that trajectory. So we need to find a way of sustaining the data collection of such important statistics. For this reason, we've taken steps to engage the rights duty bearers, and that conversation has started. We are hoping that by the end of 2025, where the current funding for HISWA, that is the project that is funding AHIS ends, we would have had a good sense of how this can be sustained. But that conversation has started, and we are hoping that we can go with it. So thank you very much. Professor Babwati indicated our goal is to have a 1/4 lag. So with the program, what you see is that the first quarter of 2023, coordinator, I hope I'm happy to announce this. I wanted you to announce it, but once it's come up, I'm announcing it. So the first quarter of 2024, we are looking forward to releasing it by the end of March, so that we can keep to the 1/4 quarterly statistics. That is the expectation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. We'll take the next set of remarks and questions.
Thank you. Yes, I will add my voice to thanking you for doing a wonderful job. We know without data, there can be development. What about the policymakers are talking? Data is very key. I want to, I have not introduced myself. My name is Mutaru Goro. I work for United Nations Population Fund. Is that okay? Can I proceed? Thank you. I want to come from demographic dividend point of view. Ghana and in Africa at large, we are now having the highest proportion of young people in our population. And that will require innovative approaches, because everyone will experience numbers in our schools are increasing. And as they go to school, they come out with skills. And when they come out and there's no job, it's going to be a problem. So as countries, we need to plan for them. I want to say that UNFPA has been supporting the country to make efforts to harness the dividend. In simple terms, to get the young people acquire employable skills to be able to contribute to the economy. And one of the key indicators to look at is employment. So I was happy to hear the details about the employment. We have been looking at how many young people have been employed over a period. We have not thought deeply into the transitions. We look at the number employed, then we run away with the number. We don't look at those who drop out and those who rejoin. So GSS, thank you for these statistics. And as a nation, we need to look at creating sustainable jobs for young people. Not that they get job today, 2 years' time, or in a 3 months' time, they get out. Then we still running with that earlier statistics that they get job. So GSS, I want to urge you to get closer to those who have the responsibility of creating jobs for young people, to ensure that we get sustainable jobs, not political, short-period jobs. One more comment. When you're talking of vulnerable employment, you mentioned that Northeast, OT region, and Savannah have the highest vulnerable employment. What can we do? We know there are new regions, but the vulnerability of employment in the region is not as a result of being created. These vulnerabilities were there before the new regions were created. So what can we do now to improve the vulnerability in these regions? And maybe in the next bulletin, we might even have the number increasing. That's not my hope, or reducing, which is my hope. Thank you.
Any more? Okay. All right, thank you. We'll now call on the Deputy Government Statistician, Dr. Frimpong Engwa, to launch the report.
Thank you, and stand on existing protocols. For us as an institution, yesterday I did mention it. When you cook, in us, cooking is providing the statistics or generating the figures that we need. When you cook and people use it, then you know that indeed you have served your nation well. And so today, on behalf of to launch the 2023 Annual Household Income Expenditure Survey, Labor Statistics for Q3. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bright Mensah will now tell us where we are going from here.
UNFPA, the vulnerability you talked about, Northeast, OT, and then my famous Savannah. The population is telling us it's our education that is really down in all those ranks that we score very low. We will focus on these areas. We'll do a detailed, in-depth analysis, and we'll get to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And when you have professors as your boss, they make work easy for you. So they've mentioned most of the things that I have to say in the next step. But in the next step, I want to say that AHES still continues. Hopefully, By 1st of March, we're going back to the field to do the data collection for this year. So between 1st of March, maybe the first week of April, we'll be done with 2024 quarter one data collection. And as was rightly indicated, we exited the field for the last quarter, that's 2023 quarter four. We exited the field on 31st of January this year. So we're giving ourselves that hectic task to make sure that by March of this year, we'll let you have the situation for last quarter. And we want to delve deep into the data, so the thematic reports that we talk about, we hope to get back to you. We've not discussed issues about underemployment, which is also an issue that we really have to know. Over the years, we've been talking about employment, unemployment. Are we really, our skills being really used in where we are working? Are we working less than we thought we could do? So those issues on underemployment, the gender dimension, the regional distribution, the dynamics that we're talking about, spatial distribution issues, the demographic characteristics, we're going to delve deep into some of the thematic reports. Formal, informal employment, is something that we'll visit, and we hope by May we'll come out with that and the gender pay gap. I think we mentioned a bit in our last visit on the gender pay, but we want to delve deep into that. And when we have gone to the field from 1st March and finished by April, we hope that by June we will come out with what is existing this year. So I want to take this opportunity to thank my field officers, the drivers, the interviewers, the supervisors. You are doing a great job. Without you, we wouldn't have come this far. And the respondents, yes, we will continue to burden you, because once we selected you in first quarter of 2022, we're going to follow you to as somebody will say. So we please ask for your patience and your collaboration as we come back to you. And for those who refuse, when we came back to them, we are asking, please, these are what will come out when you respond to our questions. So we'll come back again, even though you refuse us, we'll come back again and knock at your door, and we hope that this time you respond to. And for my project implementation team, thank you so much for your support. And for management, we couldn't have come this far without your support. So next step, you'll hear from us in the next month or so, and we hope to have a full house as we have here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Bright-Mensah. And I also want to express our sincere thanks to you all, especially our development partners, MDAs, MMDAs, and especially the media. Without you, our message will not go anywhere. Thank you all for coming. And to depart, before we depart, I'll call on Mr. Anthony Odrodentra to commit us into the hands of God.
Thank you. Shall we please be upstanding as we say a word of prayer? I believe that we couldn't have come this far, as the coordinator said, without the help of God. Let us pray. Father, we are grateful to you for how far you have brought us as an institution. Thank you for the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding through which we've been able to produce such reports. We know that you, when you begin with us, you are faithful to bring it to an end. We commit the remaining reports that have been mentioned here onto thy hand. May we gather again to share what we've been able to do, that in the end, your name will be glorified. We thank you for answered prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Please be seated.
Thank you. And for your information, the report will be on our website. The microdata tool for the labor statistics that we have released will be on the website. When we have released the other thematic reports, we'll make the microdata available. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. Lunch is served outside. Thank you.